My name is Norbert, and I'm 63 years old. I spent 29 years running a marine engine restoration business here in Spokane, Washington, specializing in luxury yacht engines for high-end clients across the Pacific Northwest. When my son Xander looked back at me on that hiking trail in Yellowstone Canyon and said, "Hope you brought water," before disappearing around the bend with that cold laugh, I trusted my gut and turned around immediately. What I discovered when I got back to our campsite changed everything I thought I knew about my family, and I never saw my son the same way again. That Father's Day weekend was supposed to be our annual tradition, 3 generations of men from our family camping together in Yellowstone. I'd been organizing and paying for these trips for over 15 years, ever since Xander graduated high school. My grandson Jace, who was 22 now, had driven up from Seattle to meet us. The whole thing cost me nearly $4,000 between the camping permits, equipment, food, and gas money I'd given both of them. Hell, I'd even bought Xander a new GPS watch the week before, $400 Garmin that he'd been wanting for months. But something felt wrong from the moment we set up camp Friday evening. Xander kept checking his phone, which was weird because cell service was spotty at best out there. Jace seemed nervous, jumpy, kept looking toward the main road like he was expecting someone. When I asked about it, they both brushed it off, said they were just excited to be outdoors. I'd raised Xander, to be honest, taught him the precision and attention to detail that came from rebuilding million-dollar marine engines. This evasiveness wasn't like him. Saturday morning, we planned to hike the rim trail along the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. I'd done this route dozens of times over the years, knew every switchback, every viewpoint, every place where the trail got narrow. Working on yacht engines had taught me the importance of preparation and backup systems. I always carried extra water, first aid supplies, emergency beacon, the works. But when Xander suggested we take the more challenging backcountry route instead of our usual family-friendly path, something in his tone made my stomach tighten. The marine restoration business had taught me to read people. Yacht owners worth millions don't trust their engines to just anyone. You learn to pick up on subtle cues, the things people don't say out loud. And everything about Xander's behavior that morning was setting off alarm bells. The way he insisted on leading the hike, the way he kept checking that expensive watch I'd bought him, the way he exchanged looks with Jace when they thought I wasn't watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments if you've ever had a gut feeling that saved you from something terrible. We started the hike around 8 in the morning, with me carrying the heaviest pack as usual. At 63, I was still in better shape than most men half my age. Rebuilding marine engines keeps you strong, and I'd been hiking these mountains since before Xander was born. But about 2 miles in, when the trail started getting steep and rocky, Xander suddenly stopped and turned around with this expression I'd never seen before. That's when he said it. "Hope you brought water, old man." But it wasn't concern in his voice. It was something else entirely. Something that made every instinct I'd developed over 3 decades of business dealings scream danger. Then he laughed. This cold, calculated sound that didn't belong to the son I'd raised, and disappeared around the next bend with Jace right behind him. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, my heart pounding, before I made the decision that probably saved my life. Instead of following them deeper into the canyon, I turned around and headed straight back to our campsite. The marine engine business had taught me that when something doesn't sound right, you stop everything and investigate. Engines don't lie, and neither do instincts. What I found when I got back to camp would haunt me for the rest of my life. For 29 years, I'd built my marine engine restoration business from a single-bay garage into the premier yacht service operation between Seattle and Vancouver. My client list read like a who's who of Pacific Northwest wealth. Tech executives, shipping magnates, lumber barons who trusted me with engines worth more than most people's houses. I'd earned that trust through precision, reliability, and an obsessive attention to detail that came from understanding that when you're 50 miles offshore, mechanical failure isn't just inconvenient, it's potentially fatal. That same methodical approach had guided how I raised Xander after his mother died when he was 12. I taught him the value of hard work, watching him sweep my shop floors every summer from age 13 to 18. When he graduated, I'd paid his full tuition at Washington State University, $68,000 over 4 years. When he married his college girlfriend Bryn, I'd covered their wedding costs, another $22,000 for what Bryn called their dream day, at a vineyard outside Walla Walla. When Jace was born, I'd started a college fund immediately, contributing $500 every month for 22 years. When Xander's marriage fell apart 3 years ago, I'd helped him with his divorce attorney fees, another $15,000. When he needed a down payment for his condo in Bellevue, I'd loaned him $40,000 from my retirement savings. Every Christmas, every birthday, every time he called with some financial emergency, I was there with my checkbook open. Our Father's Day camping trips had become sacred to me after my wife passed. It was our chance to be 3 generations of men together, sharing stories around the campfire, fishing the streams, hiking the trails I'd explored as a young man. I'd been doing this exact trip to Yellowstone for 15 consecutive years. Always the same campground, always the same weekend, always me handling every detail and expense. But looking back now, I could see the signs I'd been too trusting to recognize. How Xander had been asking more detailed questions about my business finances over the past few months. How he'd suddenly become interested in my estate planning, asking about my will, my life insurance policy, my retirement accounts. How he'd suggested adding Jace to my business checking account just in case something happened. The marine engine business had taught me that small problems, left unchecked, eventually become catastrophic failures. A loose bolt becomes a seized piston. A minor leak becomes a flooded engine compartment. And apparently, a son's financial desperation could become something far more sinister than I'd ever imagined possible. I should have paid attention when he started asking about my health, suggesting I should slow down and think about retirement. When he'd brought up stories about older business owners who died suddenly, leaving their affairs in chaos. When he'd offered to help me organize my important documents and seemed disappointed when I told him everything was already handled by my attorney in Spokane. The precision that made me successful in marine restoration, checking every connection, testing every system, never assuming anything was working correctly just because it looked fine on the surface, had somehow failed me when it came to my own family. I'd been so focused on providing for Xander and Jace that I'd missed the fact that they weren't grateful for my generosity. They were calculating how to maximize it. The first real warning sign had come 3 weeks earlier, though I dismissed it at the time. I'd been working late in my shop, rebuilding a Caterpillar engine for a 90-foot yacht, when I heard voices outside. Xander's truck was parked behind my building, which was odd since he hadn't mentioned stopping by. I walked toward the back door to greet him and heard him talking on his phone. "The old man's got at least $2 million tied up in that business," he was saying. "Plus the life insurance, the house, the investment accounts. We just need to be patient a little longer." I'd frozen in place, my hand on the door handle. Xander continued talking, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Jace thinks we should wait until after the camping trip. Make it look natural. Hiking accidents happen all the time out there, especially to guys his age who think they're still 20. My blood had turned ice cold. I'd backed away from the door, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Surely I'd misunderstood. This was my son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd supported through every crisis in his adult life. But the words kept echoing in my head. Make it look natural. Hiking accidents happen all the time. Over the next 3 weeks, I'd started paying closer attention. Xander's sudden interest in my business insurance policies. His questions about whether anyone else had keys to my shop. His suggestion that we should hike more challenging trails this year. Push ourselves, he'd said. His insistence that we go to more remote areas of Yellowstone, away from the main tourist routes. I'd also noticed changes in Jace. My grandson had always been close to me, but lately he'd seemed distant, uncomfortable. When I'd taken him to lunch 2 weeks before the trip, he'd barely made eye contact. When I'd asked about his plans after college, he'd given vague answers. When I'd mentioned setting aside money for his future, he'd looked almost guilty. The marine engine restoration business had taught me to document everything. Every repair, every part, every hour of labor. So I'd started keeping notes about the strange conversations, the odd behavior, the questions that didn't quite add up. I'd even started recording some of our phone calls, something I'd never thought I'd need to do with my own family. But nothing had prepared me for the moment on that trail when Xander's mask had finally slipped completely. The cold calculation in his voice when he said, "Hope you brought water, old man." The way he'd looked at me, not like a son looking at his father, but like someone evaluating a problem that needed to be solved. Working with precision engines had taught me that when a system starts showing signs of failure, you don't ignore it and hope for the best. You shut everything down immediately and investigate. That's exactly what my instincts were screaming at me to do when I heard that laugh and watched my son and grandson disappear around the bend, leaving me alone on a narrow mountain trail with no witness to what might happen next. The hike back to camp had taken me 45 minutes, my mind racing the entire time. I kept thinking about all the money I'd given them over the years, all the trust I'd placed in them, all the times I'd put their needs ahead of my own financial security. And I kept hearing Xander's voice from that night outside my shop. Hiking accidents happen all the time out there. When I reached our campsite, my hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. 1 bar of signal, barely enough, but it would have to do. I called my attorney first, Frank Morrison, who'd been handling my business and personal legal affairs for over 20 years. Frank knew me well enough to hear the urgency in my voice when I told him I needed to make some immediate changes to my will and business documents. "Norbert, what's going on?" he asked. "You sound like hell." I gave him the abbreviated version, enough to convey the seriousness without sounding like a paranoid old man. Frank had been practicing law in Spokane for 35 years. He'd seen family greed destroy more relationships than divorce and business disputes combined. "How quickly can you change my beneficiaries?" I asked. "If it's truly urgent, I can have new documents ready by Monday morning. But Norbert, are you sure about this? Cutting out your son and grandson is a big step." "Frank, I'm standing in a campground in Yellowstone where my son just led me onto a dangerous trail and abandoned me. 3 weeks ago, I overheard him talking about my death, like it was a business opportunity. I need these changes made immediately." While Frank started working on the legal documents remotely, I called my business insurance agent, then my financial advisor. Each conversation was brief but critical. By the time I finished, I'd changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance policies, my retirement accounts, and my business ownership documents. Everything would now go to a charitable foundation I'd been supporting for years, with a provision that if I died under suspicious circumstances, an independent investigation would be funded. Then, I did something that 29 years in the marine restoration business had taught me was essential when dealing with potential catastrophic failure. I documented everything. I used my phone to record a detailed video message explaining the situation, the conversations I'd overheard, and my current location. I uploaded it to a cloud storage account and sent copies to Frank, my business manager, and my insurance agent. Next, I went through Xander and Jace's belongings in their tent. What I found made my stomach turn. Xander had printed out detailed maps of the backcountry trails we were supposed to hike, with specific locations marked. But these weren't scenic viewpoints or photo opportunities. They were spots where the trail narrowed to single-file passage along cliff edges. Places where a slip would mean a fall of several hundred feet onto rocks below. I also found something that chilled me to the bone, a small pharmacy bottle in Jace's backpack containing pills that looked like my heart medication, but the label had been removed. I'd been taking the same prescription for 5 years, small white tablets for blood pressure control. These looked identical, but I had no way of knowing what they actually were without getting them tested. The marine engine business had taught me that mechanical failures rarely happen by accident. Someone either doesn't maintain the equipment properly or they deliberately sabotage it. Looking at those unmarked pills, I realized my son and grandson had moved far beyond just hoping for a convenient accident. They were actively planning to cause one. I photographed everything: the maps, the pills, their gear, even the inside of their tent. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. If they were planning what I suspected, I needed them to believe their plan was still secret. The hardest part was calling my neighbor back in Spokane, an old friend named Carl who'd been my fishing buddy for 15 years. I asked him to drive by my shop and my house, just to make sure everything looked normal. What he told me confirmed my worst fears. "Norbert, there's been a locksmith van at your shop for the past 2 hours, and I saw Xander's truck there yesterday when you were supposed to be camping. You want me to call the police?" "Not yet, Carl," I told him, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "But I need you to do something for me. Take photos of that locksmith van, get the license plate, and document everything. Then call Frank Morrison's office and tell them what you're seeing." After I hung up with Carl, I sat on a log outside my tent and tried to process the magnitude of what my son and grandson were planning. This wasn't just about wanting my money when I died naturally. They were orchestrating my murder, and they'd been setting it up for weeks, maybe months. The locksmith at my shop meant they were already planning to take control of my business assets. The unmarked pills meant they intended to incapacitate me before staging my accident. The marine restoration business had taught me that complex systems fail when multiple components break down simultaneously. What Xander and Jace had planned was exactly that: a coordinated attack on multiple fronts. Disable me with unknown drugs, lead me to a dangerous location, stage a fall, then return to Spokane to claim their inheritance and take over my business. I pulled out the detailed topographical maps I always carried and studied the terrain around our campsite. There were 3 ways back to the main road, and I needed to choose my route carefully. If Xander and Jace returned to camp expecting to find me gone or incapacitated, I wanted to be ready with my own plan. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Emergency documents filed electronically. Hard copies ready Monday. Also called state police. They're sending someone to your location. Stay safe. Another text came from Carl. Locksmith gone. Shop looks secured but different. Xander's been here multiple times this week, according to neighbors. Also found this interesting. He's been asking around about your health, telling people you've seemed confused lately. That detail hit me like a punch to the gut. Xander had been laying groundwork to suggest I was mentally declining, probably to explain away any suspicious circumstances around my death. If anyone questioned how an experienced hiker like me could fall off a trail I'd walked dozens of times, he'd have a ready explanation. Dad had been getting forgetful, confused about directions. I called my family doctor in Spokane and asked him to pull my recent medical records. Doc, this is going to sound paranoid, but has anyone called asking about my mental state or overall health? My son specifically? Dr. Peterson's pause told me everything I needed to know. Actually, yes. Xander called Tuesday asking if I thought you should still be living alone, driving, managing business affairs. He seemed concerned about some incidents he claimed you'd had. I told him you'd passed your last physical with flying colors and showed no signs of cognitive decline. What kind of incidents did he describe? Getting lost, driving to familiar places, forgetting appointments, confusion about financial matters. Norbert, I assumed you'd asked him to call. Are you telling me that conversation was fabricated? The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Xander hadn't just been planning my death. He'd been systematically building a case that I was mentally incompetent. If their plan had worked, if I'd died on that trail, everyone would have accepted it as a tragic but understandable accident. An aging businessman who'd been showing signs of confusion, who'd insisted on hiking dangerous trails despite his declining mental state. I heard voices in the distance and quickly ended the call. Through the trees, I could see Xander and Jace returning to camp, moving slowly, talking in low voices. They were probably expecting to find me either unconscious from whatever was in those pills or simply gone, having continued on the trail where they could later discover my body at the bottom of a cliff. Instead, they were going to find me very much alive, very much alert, and very much aware of exactly what they'd been planning. Xander and Jace appeared through the trees about 20 minutes later, and I'll never forget the look of shock on their faces when they saw me sitting calmly by our campfire, cooking lunch like nothing had happened. Xander recovered first, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, there you are. We were worried when we didn't see you on the trail. Did you decide not to follow us?" This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for. I looked up at my son, this man I'd raised from a boy, and spoke the words that would change everything between us forever. "Hope you brought water, son, because you're going to need it for the long walk back to civilization after I drive away without you." The color drained from both their faces. Jace took a step backward, but Xander's expression shifted to something I'd never seen before: cold calculation mixed with panic. "What are you talking about, Dad? Are you feeling okay? You're acting strange." "Strange?" I stood up slowly, my eyes never leaving his face. Like asking a locksmith to change the locks on my shop while I'm supposed to be camping. Like telling my doctor I'm showing signs of mental decline. Like marking cliff locations on trail maps. Like bringing unmarked pills that look suspiciously like my heart medication. Jace's face went white as a sheet. "Grandpa, I don't know what you think you..." "I know exactly what I found in your backpack, Jace. I know about the conversations outside my shop 3 weeks ago. I know about the insurance policies you've been asking about, and I know that when my son looked back at me on that trail and said, 'Hope you brought water, old man,' he wasn't concerned about my hydration. He was making sure I'd be found dehydrated and disoriented at the bottom of a cliff." Xander's mask finally slipped completely. The loving son disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. You paranoid old bastard. You've always been too suspicious for your own good. Suspicious enough to record our conversations. Suspicious enough to change all my beneficiaries this morning. Suspicious enough to call the state police. I pulled out my phone and showed them the call log. They should be here within the hour. That's when Jace broke. Grandpa, please. It wasn't my idea. Xander said you had more money than you could ever spend, that you were getting old anyway, that it would just speed up what was going to happen eventually. Shut up! Xander snapped at his son. Just shut up! But Jace was crying now, 22 years old and falling apart under the weight of what they'd planned. He said we'd just help you along a little, make it look like an accident. He said you'd want us to have the money anyway, that this was just collecting our inheritance early. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. My son and grandson had been planning to murder me for my money, and they'd convinced themselves it was somehow justified because I would have wanted them to have it anyway. I looked at Xander, searching for any trace of the boy I'd raised, the man I'd supported through every crisis in his adult life. You were going to drug me and push me off a cliff for money I would have given you freely if you'd just asked. Would you? He shot back. Would you really have given us $2 million just because we asked? Or would you have lectured us about earning our own way, about the value of hard work, about not expecting handouts? The truth in his words stung because he was partially right. I would have helped them, but I would have wanted to know why they needed so much money, what their plans were, how they intended to use it responsibly. You're damn right I would have asked questions, I said, my voice harder than tempered steel. Because that's what responsible people do with $2 million. But you know what, Xander? You'll never know now whether I would have said yes or no, because you chose murder over conversation. Xander's composure cracked further. You don't understand the pressure we've been under. Jace's student loans, my divorce settlement, the business investments that went bad. We needed that money. So you decided to kill me for it. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Instead of coming to your father, the man who's bailed you out of every financial crisis you've ever had, you decided it would be easier to stage my death and collect insurance money. I could hear vehicles approaching on the Forest Service Road, the state police, right on schedule. But I wasn't done with this conversation yet. Jace, I said, looking at my grandson who was still crying. Tell me about the pills in your backpack. What were you planning to give me? They're sleeping pills, he whispered. Strong ones. Xander said they'd make you dizzy and confused, that you'd be more likely to slip and fall. And if the fall didn't kill me immediately? Jace's sobs got louder. We were supposed to wait a while before calling for help. Let nature take its course. The cold brutality of their plan hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just planning to push me off a cliff. They were planning to drug me, lead me to a dangerous location, then watch me die slowly while pretending to search for help. 2 state police vehicles pulled into our campsite, followed by a park ranger truck. I'd never been so glad to see law enforcement in my entire life. Mr. Norbert Brennan? The lead trooper was a woman in her 40s, professional and alert. I'm Sergeant Martinez. We received some concerning information about potential threats to your safety. That would be accurate, Sergeant. I'd like to report a conspiracy to commit murder. I gestured toward Xander and Jace. My son and grandson have been planning to kill me for my life insurance money. Xander immediately went into damage control mode. Officer, my father has been showing signs of dementia lately. He's been confused, paranoid, making up elaborate stories. Is that why you had a locksmith change his business locks while he was supposed to be camping with you? Sergeant Martinez asked. She was clearly well briefed. Or why you've been calling his doctor suggesting he's mentally incompetent. The look of panic that flashed across Xander's face told me everything. He hadn't expected the police to be this well-informed this quickly. I have physical evidence, I told the sergeant. Trail maps with marked cliff locations, unmarked pills designed to incapacitate me, recorded conversations about my death being a business opportunity, and documentation of their attempts to access my financial accounts. While I explained the situation to the officers, I watched Xander and Jace. My son was calculating, probably trying to figure out what evidence existed and how he could explain it away, but Jace was completely broken, sobbing and mumbling apologies that came 20 years too late. The marine restoration business had taught me that when an engine fails catastrophically, You don't try to rebuild it. You scrap it and start over with quality components. Looking at my son and grandson being read their rights by state police officers, I realized that some family relationships, once broken this completely, simply couldn't be repaired. As the handcuffs clicked around Xander's wrists, he looked at me with pure hatred in his eyes. You self-righteous old fool. Do you have any idea what you've just done? You've destroyed your own family over money. No, son, I said quietly. You destroyed our family the moment you decided my life was worth less than my bank account. Sergeant Martinez was methodical in her evidence collection. She photographed the trail maps, bagged the unmarked pills for testing, and took detailed statements from all of us. When she examined Xander's marked locations on the topographical maps, she shook her head grimly. Mr. Brennan, these are some of the most dangerous cliff areas in this section of the park. Falls from these locations are almost always fatal. She looked at Xander with disgust. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. This was premeditated murder with extensive planning. The park ranger, a veteran named Tom Stevens, confirmed what I already knew. We recover bodies from these exact spots every couple of years, usually inexperienced hikers who get too close to the edge, but an experienced outdoorsman like you would never slip and fall there by accident. While the police processed the scene, my phone rang constantly. Frank Morrison calling to confirm the legal documents were filed. Carl reporting that he'd secured my shop and house. My insurance agent confirming that the policy changes were in effect. Dr. Peterson calling to say he'd prepared a written statement about Xander's deceptive phone calls regarding my mental state. But the call that affected me most came from Detective Ray Cummings with the Spokane Police Department. Mr. Brennan, we've been investigating some unusual activity around your business. Your son has been meeting with some questionable individuals lately, people with connections to insurance fraud schemes. We think your situation might be part of a larger pattern. The scope of Xander's betrayal kept expanding. This wasn't just about family greed. He'd gotten involved with criminals who specialized in staging accidents for insurance payouts. My son hadn't just planned to murder me. He'd turned it into a business opportunity with professional guidance. When Jace finally stopped crying long enough to give his statement, the full horror of their plan became clear. Xander said it happens all the time, he told Sergeant Martinez. Older people die in accidents, and families collect life insurance. He said it was practically a victimless crime because you were going to die eventually anyway. A victimless crime. I stared at my grandson in disbelief. Jace, I'm 63 years old. I could have lived another 20 or 30 years. You were planning to steal decades of my life for money you hadn't earned. But Xander said you didn't really enjoy life anymore since Grandma died. He said you were just going through the motions, that we'd be putting you out of your misery. The casual cruelty of their rationalization left me speechless. They'd convinced themselves that murdering me was somehow an act of mercy, a favor to a lonely old widower who had outlived his usefulness. As they loaded Xander and Jace into separate police vehicles, Xander turned back one last time. This isn't over, old man. You think you've won, but you've just made yourself a target. There are people involved in this who won't appreciate losing their investment. Sergeant Martinez immediately radioed for additional protection, but the threat was clear. Xander had gotten involved with people far more dangerous than I'd realized, and my refusal to die on schedule had made me a problem that needed solving. The woman I'd raised, supported, and loved unconditionally for 31 years had just threatened my life from the back of a police car because I'd survived his murder attempt. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of federal agents, witness protection discussions, and revelations that made my son's betrayal seem even more sinister. Detective Cummings had been right. Xander's plan was part of a larger insurance fraud ring that the FBI had been tracking for over a year. Special Agent Sarah Chen explained the scope during our meeting at the Spokane field office. Your son connected with this group through gambling debts in Seattle. They specialize in what they call inheritance acceleration, helping people collect life insurance payouts by staging accidents for elderly family members. You would have been their 7th victim this year. 7 other families had gone through what mine was experiencing. 7 other children had decided their parents' lives were worth less than insurance money. The FBI showed me photos of the other victims: a retired teacher in Oregon, a small business owner in Idaho, a farmer in Montana. All men in their 60s and 70s, all with substantial life insurance policies, all dead in accidents that their loving children had helped orchestrate. The good news, Agent Chen continued, is that your evidence and your son's arrest have given us enough to roll up the entire network. The bad news is that these people don't like loose ends. We're recommending you relocate until we can make all the arrests. Relocating meant leaving Spokane, leaving the marine restoration business I'd built from nothing, leaving the life I'd created over 3 decades. But staying meant risking another murder attempt from people who made killing their profession. Frank Morrison helped me arrange the sale of my business to a competitor in Seattle who'd been trying to buy me out for years. The price was fair, $1.8 million for the shop, equipment, client list, and reputation I'd built. It was enough to start over anywhere I wanted, but it felt like selling pieces of my soul. The house where I'd raised Xander, where my wife and I had planned to grow old together, went on the market the following week. Carl helped me pack the things that mattered. Photos of my wife, my tools, mementos from 30 years of successful business operations. Everything else could be replaced. 3 weeks after that Father's Day camping trip from hell, I was loading my belongings into a moving truck headed for Asheville, North Carolina. I'd chosen the location partly for its distance from Spokane, partly for its mountains that reminded me of home, and partly because nobody in my old life would think to look for me there. The federal trial began 6 months later. I testified via video link from my new home, watching my son face a jury of his peers as prosecutors laid out the evidence of premeditated murder. The marked trail maps, the drugs, the locksmith records, the insurance fraud connections. It painted a picture of calculated evil that left no room for doubt. Xander was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Jace, who had cooperated fully with investigators, received 25 years. The rest of the insurance fraud ring got sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. 7 families finally got justice for parents who died trusting the children they'd raised. But justice didn't heal the wound in my chest where my heart used to be. I'd lost my son, my grandson, my business, my home, my entire life as I'd known it. The money didn't matter. I had more than I'd ever need. But the betrayal had cut so deep that I wasn't sure I'd ever trust another human being completely again. The marine restoration business had taught me that some damage can't be repaired, only replaced. I was learning that the same principle applied to families. Today, I'm sitting on the back porch of my new home in the Blue Ridge Mountains outside Asheville, watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold and orange. It's been 18 months since that Father's Day camping trip that changed everything, and I'm finally starting to understand what my life looks like now. I never rebuilt my marine engine business. At 65, I decided I'd earned the right to retirement, even if it came earlier and more violently than I'd planned. Instead, I volunteer at a local technical college, teaching young people the precision and attention to detail that 30 years of engine restoration had taught me. These kids remind me that not all young people are driven by greed, that some still value craftsmanship and honest work. I also started a foundation using the money from selling my business, the Norbert Brennan Foundation for Elder Safety. We work with law enforcement agencies across the country to identify and prevent elder abuse, particularly the kind of inheritance fraud that nearly cost me my life. Every month, we help families recognize the warning signs that I'd been too trusting to see in my own son. When people ask me about that day in Yellowstone, about how I knew to turn around when my son said, "Hope you brought water," I tell them the truth. 30 years in precision engineering taught me to trust my instincts when something doesn't sound right. That cold laugh, that calculated tone. It wasn't the voice of someone who cared about my well-being. It was the voice of someone who was already planning my funeral. The phrase still haunts me sometimes. Not because of what Xander intended it to mean, but because of what it revealed about the man I'd raised. In that moment, when he thought he was cleverly mocking the father he was about to murder, he showed me exactly who he'd become. And for that clarity, as painful as it was, I'm almost grateful. I've learned that family isn't always about blood. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, my 82-year-old neighbor here in Asheville, checks on me every morning with a cup of coffee and stories about her late husband's woodworking shop. Tom and Janet Wesley, the couple who run the hardware store in town, invited me to Thanksgiving dinner last year when they learned I'd be alone. These people, who owe me nothing, have shown me more genuine care in 18 months than my son showed me in the final years of our relationship. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if this story resonated with you, and leave a comment about the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we need to be most careful around. The FBI tells me that 7 more insurance fraud rings have been broken up using the evidence from our case. Dozens of potential victims have been saved because we caught Xander and his associates before they could kill again. That knowledge helps me sleep at night, knowing that my survival has protected other families from experiencing this particular kind of betrayal. I still miss the son Xander used to be, or maybe the son I thought he was. But I don't miss the fear, the manipulation, or the constant financial demands that I now realize had been building for years. I don't miss walking on eggshells around my own family, always wondering what crisis would require my checkbook next. When I heard those words, "Hope you brought water," followed by that cold laugh, everything changed. I never saw my son the same way again because I finally saw him clearly for the first time. And that moment of terrible clarity, as devastating as it was, quite literally saved my life. Some people say I should try to forgive. That family is family no matter what. But 30 years of engine restoration taught me that when a component fails catastrophically, you don't rebuild it. You replace it with something better. I've built myself a new family here in North Carolina, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. And every morning when I wake up in these mountains, alive and free and surrounded by people who genuinely care about my well-being, I'm reminded that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can also be the thing that sets you free. That Father's Day weekend in Yellowstone was the last day I was anyone's victim. Everything since then has been my choice, my life, my terms. And that, more than any inheritance or life insurance policy, is worth everything.